Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Chiu. Taiwan has recently elected its next president. It comes in a year in which half of the world is expected to choose new leaders. Will 2024 see a boost in democracy or strengthen authoritarianism? Joining us today are William Vocke, Fulbright Alumni Association Board Treasurer, and Alexander Huang, Kuomintang International Affairs Director and Representative to the U.S. A very warm welcome to both on the show. This year, at least 70 countries are holding elections, the most in history. On January 7th, Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina won a fifth term. On January 13th, Taiwan elected President Lai Ching-te. That was followed by Taiwan's ally, Tuvalu, whose incumbent Prime Minister lost a re-election bid. In addition, South Korea, India, the EU, and the US are also all holding elections. So the first question is, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems says that at least 20 national leaders are up for election this year. Which of these elections do you view as especially noteworthy, William?
The obvious choice for me, of course, is America and the American election, but it's also the obvious choice for the world, given America's military and political and economic spot in the world. Other crucial elections are India, the largest democracy in the world, Indonesia, the second largest democracy in the world, and perhaps South Korea and South Africa.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I agree that it's, the elections in Indonesia and Korea are more closer to our part of the world. And the EU parliamentarian election is also very important because we wanted to see that democratic or liberal democratic institutions and societies are shining in 2024 and given us a hope that the overall democracy, landscape can be expanded.
Mm-hmm. Well, both of you mentioned some populous countries like Indonesia, India. In fact, Bloomberg estimates that countries which account for around 40% of the global GDP are set to elect new leaders. What overall effect could these leadership changes have on the global political and economic landscape? Could you kind of elaborate more? Maybe you go first.
Well, I have to say that, if we look at the numbers of elections, of course, 2024 is the numerous one. But I would focus more on the elections that within that or overlap with the members like G7, G20, or BRICS countries that had a greater impact on the directions and landscape of the world or global politics and economy. Personally, I have to say that, given these opportunities to change under a huge, overwhelming strategic competition between the United States and China, I think that any votes in any country, especially those countries that shares a bigger responsibility or posting a bigger influence on global economy would be the targets that we need to watch closely.
Mm-hmm. William, we also say that GDP or economic growth is tightly related to political landscape, or even sometimes has to do with the regional turbulence or instability. So what's your take on this? I mean, what you see in this year, 2024, is going to be a more stable year for the regional stability and peace, or you think it's less so?
I think actually less so. I think that we have some really difficult things happening in the world. Elections are one of them. There's Ukraine, there's Israel and Hamas. There's the American election, and frankly, we have two candidates that most of the American people would not like to see run. But they will end up probably being the two candidates, and America's role in the world will be substantially different depending upon who is elected. Mm-hmm. Of course, the Indian election is crucial as the largest democracy in the world. And Indonesia plays an important role in Southeast Asia. So those are also really crucial elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, but also the other question from me is that sometimes we see countries that having elections on a regular basis, but that does not necessarily mean they have democracy in substance, right? So could you, William, kind of go one step further to analyze what are those countries, might be, fall into the category I just described?
Yeah, The Economist has a whole range of democracy, from basically no democracy to the most democratic countries in the world, or with democracy where there are some threats to democracy. Two of the countries that are having elections today, and which are quasi-democratic, for instance, are Turkey and Pakistan. Another election this year is in Russia, but if you'd like to make a bet, I'll bet I know who's going to win that one.
Okay, Alex, you want to add up to this?
Yeah, there are sufficient numbers of academic research and publications talking about illiberal democracies, autocracies, the line that need to be drawn, or the spectrum from different kinds of electoral politics. Elections does not guarantee that you have a true democracy. It could be an autocracy as well. So I think more importantly is that the true democracies, and I used to call liberal democracies, that we need to refine our narrative. We need to work together and promote the values that we consider more core to our stand, and that can be shared. I think that's more important.
Well, actually, we are seeing Russia is having an election this year as well, right? So it goes without question that Putin will get elected pretty easily. You want to jump in as well?
Well, I just want to say, Dr. Huang makes an excellent point. Democracy is a relatively young phenomenon in the world. Most of the time, the world has been ruled by authoritarian governments of one form or another: monarchy, empire, despoty, oligarchy, theocracy, military rule, whatever it might be. We really do have to try to protect this fairly young institution that is global. And to do that, we have to focus not just on whether there's an election or not, but on the character of the election, on the structure of the election, a whole series of inside the beltway, inside the academia about how elections are run. There are many different ways to run elections.
Also, I'm curious about why some authoritarian country intended to have elections. For example, Russia, whereas others, for example, China, does not, have the willingness to hold elections. What's your observation of this? Does that have to do with this leadership or this legitimacy of how they govern the country?
One of the trends since 1800 on has been a trend called popular sovereignty, that the people have a right to have something to say about what happens in their lives through government. And that trend has meant that even the most autocratic ruler has often felt the need to have mock elections, elections that allow them then to say, we have legitimacy, we are following the people's will. So elections often are simply dressing. They're simply something that is put on to justify a current leadership. China apparently doesn't feel the need for that.
Alex, you want to?
Yeah, it's equivalent to William's points. Equivalent to where did you get the mandate? Mandate in the ancient time it's mandate from heaven, and now it's mandate from the people. And in the People's Republic, they claim that the Communist Party represents the interests and the rights and the will of the people. But everybody knows it's a one-party dictatorship. So I think there could be one day that Beijing is comfortable and to hold a national election, at least at the central government level, and to compete. I think this is, a remote future, but the very existence of Taiwan will be a constant reminder for the people on the other side of the Taiwan Strait, and why Taiwan people can choose our own leaders.
Okay, I mean, in Chinese culture, some political scientists, would criticize or maybe put it in this way that the Chinese culture is not a fit for democracy. But this is not the case, obviously, in Taiwan. We see the election being held on a regular basis for 8 times for presidential election already. This year, the major election will take place in 8 of the 10 most populous countries worldwide. This includes India, the US, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Mexico. Together, these 8 countries have over 2.9 billion people. So come back to the original questions. What do you two think? Will democracy or authoritarianism emerge as the dominant governance model going forward? Even though, even if in the United States you have this Donald Trump guy and also Biden, and open election obviously leads up to a schism in the society, a polarized society. So some would criticize, for example, Chinese national leaders sometimes say that democracy is such a not a good thing because it does not bring stability to the society. So what's your take on this, William?
Well, in America, for instance, we are seeing partisanship and division. We're seeing a lack of trust in all of the traditional institutions, from Congress and the media to the Supreme Court to the religious institutions. And we're seeing a dramatic increase in disinformation when the development of AI, artificial intelligence, is going to dramatically increase that disinformation. Will democracy or authoritarianism be the role of the future? Democracy is a fragile thing. And in America, we've always said it can't happen here. We can't have authoritarian here. It won't happen here. But we have one person running for the presidency who's expressed very strong authoritarian views. I can't tell you what the future is going to be. I can tell you democracy is something that has to be worked at. It's something that people have to believe in, and as Dr. Huang said before, the mandate of the people is something that has to be respected.
But also, people need to learn, even in the aftermath of election, need to learn to accept the results, electoral results. And so, we saw that actually 4 years ago in the United States. Even this time in Taiwan, there is some kind of noise, but saying that the election might be manipulated in the cheating way. But we know that it's not true. But what about you? What's your observation?
Well, I think Taiwan is a unique case. Anybody who had visited Taiwan and observed the election would understand that the night after or the day after, you won't see any campaign slogans or flags or everything cleared up. Even after 4 p.m. of the election day, the candidate already contract those workers to pull all their propaganda stuff out. And Taiwan turned into a normal day, right after the election. So I think, there will be always challenges to democratic process. I believe that, William has just mentioned that we will have new technology available that making democracy or the process more fragile and more vulnerable to new technologies. And that's why that we need to constantly help and watch and consult with democratic allies and share our experience. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. Let me put the question in this way. What's wrong with authoritarianism? I mean, if you are a citizen living in a country, what's the reason of you not accepting authoritarianism as your lifestyle, William?
Well, that's been the argument in China, hasn't it? The argument in China has been, we'll give you a good lifestyle, we'll give you a good economy, we'll give you a good job, and you let us run things. I think the argument against that is that most people want to have some say in how their lives go and what happens in their life and how the big things in their life matter. And that's what democracy has been about. Democracy has been about that mandate of the people.
But authoritarian supporters would argue that you do have some say in the political system if you report to the local officials. What's your response to that?
Well, authoritarianism generally doesn't have free speech. It generally doesn't have freedom of the press. It often doesn't have freedom of assembly. Mm-hmm. It often doesn't mean people get, even if people are well off economically, it doesn't necessarily mean they are well off personally or spiritually or in their way they think about the world. Freedom of religion is another issue that has been important. And those have been important for what Dr. Huang rightfully calls liberal democracies around the world. This is a theological or a philosophical argument about what is best for people. Mm-hmm. I think a large number of people in the world, millions, have come to the conclusion that democracy is best. The problem is the structure of democracy, how democracy is structured and how elections are set up. Most people overlook that. Most people overlook the idea that having an election in one way will have an outcome that perhaps isn't mandated. The argument has been made in this last Taiwanese election that actually a majority of the people opposed the election of the president.
Alex, even when we think about the great philosopher Plato, right? In the Platonic world, even in the Confucius world, I mean, they're pretty much parallel to the authoritarianism of the modern days, right? So what is wrong with the authoritarianism in your perspective?
Well, we need to put these terms and definitions into the context of time. And I think the call since the past 300-400 years that people started to, it's a giant awakening for me that people believe that we have the rights to determine, we have the right to participate, and we should be part of the process of decision making. There are different ways to do that. I agree with William that there are systems or institutions that needs to be refined for their process, but there is a very clear difference. Whether you give freedom to the people to express their views. And so freedom of press, freedom of speech are the cure, I believe, to the political system and help us to get so-called true democracy more meaningful. Having said this, we also need to confront against the so-called populist movement. And it's also a process. It's also democratic. But it may turn into a political movement that may, at some point, that deviate from the democracies, the core of democracy that we believe.
Right. Okay. So when it comes to a confrontation or a conflict between democracy and authoritarianism, the vulnerability of the democracy is an open society, that it receives all kinds of information in and out. So sometimes if there is an attack or investigation from the outside, it's kind of hard for the democracy to protect itself. Actually, in a report on January 11th, the Washington Post listed 4 main tactics used by China to interfere in elections. These include spreading disinformation, influencing local officials, using economic tactics, and military intimidation. The Washington Post said China might use these tactics elsewhere. After the elections, the Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation released a poll on China's election interference. About 50% feel that the situation was not serious, while 37% consider it very serious. So my question is, how do you interpret these findings, William?
Well, disinformation used to be called propaganda. It's now called disinformation because of the internet and the prevalence of information and social media. It's been a part of politics. It's increasingly difficult and increasingly hard to manage. One of the major problems in America right now is people do not agree on what the facts are. Facts are not facts. Facts are something that open to interpretation. And it can be used very easily by authoritarian governments because they don't have a commitment to the open society and open discussion of debate. So it's a very, very dangerous thing, and disinformation, particularly in a society with heavy social media interests and the development of AI, disinformation is a really key problem. And I think 50% of your people were probably correct in the Taiwanese election. We're going to see next year in the elections, not only in America but around the world, huge problems with disinformation.
But if we want to adopt or continue to believe in freedom of speech, so this is kind of loophole for the disinformation. How can we solve this problem?
It's we would say a catch-22. It's an insoluble problem. The only way you can solve it is to try to limit its impact. But to do away with it, it's not possible.
Okay, we can talk about this more. What about you, Alex?
Taiwan is pretty much isolated and very sensitive society to all information coming from outside. And Taiwan is a generally pro-West or pro-American society. So even a young American scholar writing an article about Taiwan election will be, put a lot of weight if translated into Chinese and being reported here back home. So there are omnidirectional impact or influence over Taiwan's political process. These things that been done by China toward Taiwan was not only occur during the election season.
Right.
The combat readiness patrol, military pressure, gray zone, started way back. We can say right after Speaker Pelosi's visit. We have constantly have this intimidation. Is that designed to influence Taiwan's voters' elections? Question number one. Question number two, using economic leverage over Taiwan. Come on, that has been decades long. So I think, Albert and I are college professors, and political scientists. We have a lot of homework to do to really inform our students and public that what are the election targeted influence campaign, what are the common pressure that have been constantly existing. So I think it's easy because what William said is very important. The influence campaign against free democratic process, especially artificial intelligence, is part because of the available technology and the pace of the way that we live. Especially for younger generation, our focus would be less than 30 seconds. So a long narrative, a theory, or a good 3-page good article would not reach out to the voters, but through the short video that you can send the message directly to your voters. Politicians needs to understand. The government needs to understand. I think professors, students, and the citizens should know about this.
So we educate, sophisticated students and citizens. In the end, it's very important.
Let me come back to something that you pointed out earlier, which was the peaceful transition of power.
Right.
The peaceful transition of power goes to the fundamental issue under democracy, and the fundamental issue is who has the legitimate control of force? Who can use force in a society, and how can it be used, and how is it overseen? In authoritarian governments, it's the authorities that do that. It's top down. In democracies, it's often top down, but there is control from the bottom. If nothing else, you vote the guys out. That fundamental control of force, who is able to use violence in a society and use it legitimately, and not have violence be the way we change our politics. Not have one election result in violence, which then leads to an overthrow of a government. That's the fundamental core of democracy, from which all of these other things come about. And it was right for you to point that out earlier as a key ingredient.
Okay, good. So let's come back to the effects of this disinformation on Taiwan. U.S. Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, a senior member of the House China Task Force, said in an interview that Taiwan's election results show that China's election interference attempts were unsuccessful. What do you think?
I think that's probably true. I think they were unsuccessful, and I think it's as Dr. Huang said, that Taiwan is particularly sensitive, and the people of Taiwan are particularly sensitive to these things. So this is going to be an increasingly difficult issue for the future. In some ways, Taiwan has, I wouldn't say inoculated against this, but the Taiwanese people are very aware of what's happening, and I think are more sensitive to the impact.
Taiwanese voters very special in this regard. Where there's a proof to this disinformation.
I have to say
attack.
that Congressman Krishnamurthy is a Democrat, right? If in November election that the Democrats win the presidency again, would he say that all the foreign interference over the election was unsuccessful? Or he would say that if the Republican wins, then America was under attack of foreign interference. So I think, to be fair, in political science or in politics, that all the political interference or foreign interference should not be targeted or linked with one victory of a particular party. Because we celebrate democracy, we do not celebrate a victory of a political party. So I think that we need to communicate better. We need to understand our society. And I have to say that in this coming November election in 2024 in the United States, I would say it's more vulnerable because the United States is a huge country with, a lot of voters that need to be reached out by, a short film and other means platforms. And so the artificial intelligence and deep fake, those kind of technologies will have a greater impact. So if we worried about our own democracy, we need to help each other and prevent that at the most as we can.
Mm-hmm. Alex, William, thank you for the great insights.
Thank you, Albert.
2024 is shaping up to be an important election year. Taiwan has elected its next president despite accusations of Chinese interference in its democratic process. But with many more elections left to go, the question remains, will authoritarianism or democracy prevail in 2024? Did you like this episode? Leave us a message and subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.